de empezar quisiera agradecer al MUAC por ser el anfitrión de esta actividad, a la cátedra Ingmar Bergman, un agradecimiento muy especial a Centro, que es con quienes copresentamos esta actividad, y bueno, todo el resto de nuestros aliados que hacen posible que estemos aquí congregados. Les recuerdo que estaremos en transmisión por FICUNAM también, así que muchas gracias. Gracias a todos quienes nos están viendo. Bueno, pues antes de iniciar, Saodat, gracias, bienvenida. Muchísimas gracias por tus películas, por tus instalaciones, por tu presencia, por tu palabra amable y sabia, así que muchas gracias por estar aquí. Antes de empezar esta conversación quisiera pues leerles una semblanza de Saodat para quienes quizás requieran un poquillo más de contexto, y es la siguiente. Saodat Ismailova, nacida en Tashkent, Uzbekistán, es una cineasta y artista que alcanzó la mayoría de edad en la era postsoviética y ha establecido una vida artística profundamente comprometida con su región natal como fuente de inspiración creativa. Se graduó del Tashkent State Art Institute de Uzbekistán y del National Studio of Contemporary Arts Le Fresnoy en Francia. Sus películas y videoinstalaciones se han presentado en la Bienal de Venecia, Documenta Kassel, la Berlinale, el Festival Internacional de Cine de Rotterdam y en CPH Docs, entre otros. Sus obras forman parte de las colecciones del Museo Stedelijk de Ámsterdam, el Centre Pompidou de París y el Museo de Arte de Almaty en Kazajistán. También se encuentran en colecciones privadas. En el 2022, Saodat Ismailova fue la única artista en ser convocada a participar tanto de la 59ª Bienal de Arte de Venecia como de Documenta 15 en Kassel, magnos eventos que coincidieron ese año. Tras ser galardonada con el iArt and Film Prize en Ámsterdam, en el 2023 el iFilm Museum celebra la primera retrospectiva integral de su obra instalativa, después de lo cual aterriza aquí en FICUNAM con una retrospectiva que comprende 12 trabajos. Les pido por favor un aplauso para Saodat Ismailova. Ok, Saodat. Bueno, yo quisiera iniciar esta conversación yéndonos un poco a los orígenes y con algo que quizás es un tanto más anecdótico, que tiene que ver con tu vida pues personal. Luego podremos profundizar un poco más pues ya en tu trabajo, en tus procesos. Y quisiera que nos hablaras un poco de la figura de tu abuela y de cómo tu abuela, lo digo porque siento que fue alguien importante y clave en pues en tus inicios, ¿no? Y en tus intereses que siguen siendo recurrentes y quizás también en obsesiones, ¿no? Entonces, me gustaría que empezáramos por ahí, que nos cuentes un poco de tu abuela como pues, fuente de inspiración.
It's working, right? Well, Max, thanks a lot for inviting me to FICUNAM and organizing this beautiful welcome and showing my works. And thanks for this important question, because in fact I think I'm just retelling the stories that she told me. But since we are not oral storytellers anymore, but we use modern tools to tell the stories, I think that is all I can say about what I do.
Okay. Bueno, ahora que mencionas la tradición oral, siento que es un elemento muy importante, ¿no? En toda tu obra. Recuerdo pláticas que hemos tenido tú y yo antes, en donde pues, me enseñaste y me enteré que el idioma uzbeco, y en particular el alfabeto del uzbeco, ha sufrido, digamos, varios cambios. O sea, no es un alfabeto como no sé, como estamos acostumbrados a que nuestro alfabeto aquí pues, ha sido el mismo prácticamente desde hace mucho tiempo, pero el uzbeco no, y en ese sentido la tradición oral entra a jugar un papel muy importante, no solo a nivel cultural como ¿no? Pues para mantener las tradiciones y la memoria, sino pues como en todo, digamos, en el entorno social, ¿no? Entonces, menciono esto porque tu cine siento que busca también como preservar y traer del pasado pues todo un bagaje de tradiciones y un bagaje cultural que incluso se remonta a tiempos pues ancestrales, ¿no? No solo pues a toda una época presoviética, sino estamos hablando de épocas pre-Islam y bueno, pero cuéntanos un poco sobre la visión que tienes sobre el cine como lenguaje que sirve para preservar la memoria y celebrarla en el presente.
I don't know from where to start. I think just going back to your first question about my grandmother, of course she lived, she was born in 1924, but since there was this strong tradition of telling and retelling, I think that it's also part of culture to remember what was remembered before you. And there was always this notion of 6 generations before you and being aware of their experience. And I think that this responsibility to transmit that experience, so somehow by growing up, you carry on the memory, and with the memory, you also carry on political circumstances that were happening, what they were going through, and what was the historical moments that they lived, which was never like the major point, but it would, of course, be part of all the stories, because the Soviet Union was established together with the Russian Revolution. Before that, we were a colony of Russia. And Uzbekistan was created in 1924, so all these concepts were totally new, for example, for my grandmother. Me growing up, I went to the Russian school because to make a career and to kind of grow and find yourself, you had to speak Russian. Though within the family, the language was sacred, we were not allowed to speak Russian by my grandmother. And there was a very clear and strong statement to hold on what is given within the family, because it was, of course, not verbalized by her, but with time I understand it's that what gives you a certain type of position of being, it's not to say sustained, but it's like to stand, you know, like you stand whatever happens. And I think that this was the major point of transmitting the stories, you know. More I think about it, I come to that, you know. It's like whatever changes, you know, on a political landscape, but when I hold to that, you know, you stand. You are not like, there is no doubts, there is no kind of, you understand what is temporary and what is deeper in time, you know, somehow. And I'm kind of very grateful that work she did with us in the family. And speaking about the alphabets, for example, it's her who lived this changement of the alphabet because she came from a literate family. And but their books were taken, burned, and she even was telling me like her memory when they were burying the books to the in the earth, like engravements, because they didn't want them to be burned by strangers, you know, like by outsiders. So there was always this respect for the knowledge and for the written transmission.
But these books were buried like in secret. Like places that afterwards you then go and...
No, we don't, because we went away from the city where we come from because of the repressions and all that. And I think that it's impossible to retrace. But anyway, like her point also was always like, because she also came from a religious family. But the point was like, it's either knowledge or a prayer, it's equal, you know, like you can grow through the knowledge and you can be, you know, get, how you say, you know, like when you feel complete through the knowledge. It's not necessarily through like prayer or direct religious practice. So the changement of the alphabet started with the establishment of Uzbekistan. Before that we used Arabic writing. Then it was changed to Latin. And then it was changed to Arabic for a moment and then to Cyrillic. So there was like changement one after the other. And of course it was a genius plan of Soviet Union to cut the knowledge, because like that you don't have access to the written knowledge. Because in Uzbekistan we have not only literature, poetical knowledge, you know, but also there were philosophical tractates written that were accessible, so that is totally cut out. But what they could transmit, it was oral. And the oral, what is beautiful about oral, there is more emotions, you know. And I think that goes, so it's not like an intellectual, mental way to discover things, but it's when you go through emotions and of course certain pain that she managed to transmit, you know, like as a resistance to what has happened to them. And I think that in that level, the oral transmission goes deeper.
No, I found that really captivating, because I have the sense that your films, or most of your films and installations aim to that oral tradition that at the same time has a margin of improvisation, maybe, because as it is not written, maybe it changes, or you know, like can change throughout time, and it's captivating because your work maybe it's not based on the written language; it goes directly there, and I think that is great. And maybe you can also tell us a bit more.
Yes, I think that it's also about working, having a sensorial experience, you know. When we speak about emotion, of course, it goes through a sensorial contact and a sensorial experience. And cinema and moving image and sound, it's probably one of the most incredible tools to share this mood, atmosphere, so a person watching can go through its own sensorial experience. And for this reason, I think it keeps me making work one after the work, regardless the circumstances. But as you say, there is, you know, the storytellers were improvisers, and this was the very important part of them telling the stories. Also, the musicians, initially they were improvisers before our music was noted, because we have Oriental music, and it's totally based on improvisation and on an interaction with the listener. You know, it's not like you impose, but you react, and then you play. So there is a certain type of a live reaction and improvisation. Of course, I don't do my films open. They are closed in editing, so it's not real improvisation. So it has a certain moment when it's locked. But I think that the film gives this possibility of having showing works in open editing as well, you know, like in real time. When you react and interact, that I've never done, but in fact there are these options as well. So when it really becomes a live interaction with audience, or like saying a storytelling, but I think in more pure way when you sense your audience.
I also want you to talk about. I mean, I feel that your work and your interest as an artist, you know, you have this objective maybe of decolonializing, like our minds as audience, you know, like you don't need like the Occidental or the Russian affirmation, no, to. And that it's very, very strong, and as audience we receive that like in a frontal and sincere way, and I think that is great. But my question is, And this comes from, yesterday you gave me this beautiful book, you know, QQ. That, okay, I started reading it and that, but there were some drawings in the book and these notes in the drawing that there's no credit or explanation about the drawing to protect, you know, this language, this ancestral knowledge. And so there's like a dichotomy there, because your work brings to present this some of a part of this knowledge, but at the same time you protect it. You know. So tell us a little bit more about this, because you have very specific interest, no, in the territory, you know, of Central Asia. How do you find this balance?
It's not evident for me, you know, Max. I don't know. Like also the question of decolonial thinking, it came afterwards. I was telling you yesterday, you know, like I was making films, and I never thought that it proposes this decolonial thinking before some scholars start reacting, you know, and entering the conversation, and then there is. Suddenly I start understanding, you know, how the work is read and what it means for the viewers, you know. But for me it was a pure, to say it intuitive, but it's the world where I feel that I'm more true to myself, and that I just kept on doing it. So somehow escaping this, as you say, what was shaped and what was thought, or because all of our cinema, of course, had to be legitimated in Moscow. It's the Moscow that legitimated, and today it's Europe that legitimates a lot of artworks and cinema, you know. So sometimes when you show your work in your community, you need to go around, you know, get accepted, and then bring it back, and then it will be accepted. So there is a very strange process, I think, of this, how you legitimize your work. I wish we would be able to legitimize ourselves directly, you know, and I think that this is what we should aim on, but not to wait that it is accepted somewhere else, so then it is read. Because, of course, the language I propose, it's not a language that is used in Central Asia, in cinema or in a moving image. So it's a bit, sometimes it takes time, you know, but it happens. It's just a lot of patience. And about the knowledge, I always question myself, do I have right at all to speak about this knowledge, you know, because this I don't know. Because I always ask myself, especially this work I did in Documenta in 2022 called Chilton, which is about this 40 presence of spirits, shapeshifters, non-gender spirits, that comes actually from pre-Islamic beliefs. I really asked many times myself, do I have right at all to go that deep? Because that knowledge is not accessible on the first level. And the reference for that is always the Russian Academical School of Oriental Studies, you know, so they are the ones that studied and documented and made all these ethnographic anthropological studies, and they fixed it. And very often I refer to that, you know, like I look for the things in those books, but then there is some, you see, they couldn't access. And it's not a question of the language, but they couldn't access because you really need to go through several steps to access it. And so when we were doing this book, in fact, from the editorial house, there was a question like, what is it? Can you explain? And it's Rolando who stopped me. Rolando Vasquez, he said, stop, you stop here, keep it for yourself, you know.
Okay. It was a decision from the editor.
Editor wanted to know more, but Rolando Vasquez, who is a decolonial thinker, and he's Mexican, you know, and he said, Miss Saodat, keep it for yourself, you know, this should not be explained.
That's great to hear, because even though your work and everything around you are from Central Asia, Uzbekistan, specific territory, specific culture, there are a lot of things in common with, for example, our Mesoamerican culture, or in general here in Mexico, and for many artists and filmmakers, I think it's very revelating. How do you say that? to be exposed to your work, because it comes from the other side of the world. But all these questions, all these issues that Rolando also pointed out, there's a reason for that, and we are also struggling here with decolonializing our minds, our creative processes, and so on.
I think that we think that it again goes back to this question of legitimization. Like you try to explain because you try to give you rationalize something that you try to rationalize something that should not be rationalized. But like to be legitimized, you need to give reasons. It's reasoning, and I think that this is for me it's important to reason, but I think we should also have a trust that we don't need to explain. We stand for what we stand, and so I think that the reason of Rolando saying Saodat, keep it, it's about like you don't need to explain to be accepted. You are accepted as you are. You are like so.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's great. I see your films, I see your installations. Every time I see them, I feel there's a seek to get close to the ancestors, to not only the traditions and the rituals or the myth, but to the family, maybe, to humans that are part of the family, but that seek to be close to the ancestors in a way it's attached to the territory, there's no, there's a bond there that cannot be, and the territory is very present in your work, and the territory with an approach of sometimes I feel it like a cry of help, because it's a territory that it's in danger, or it's already destroyed, or so I'm talking about Aral, for example, this first film that you co-directed with Carlos Casas, and that is related also to other films or installations like Stains of Oxus, or even The Haunted, that talks about extinction. And you have this, this commitment or this preoccupation about this. So tell us a bit more about your vision about the territory and how your work relates to it.
Well, I think that first of all, it's kind of interesting that to define Central Asia, it's not simple. Because Central Asia itself, the word Central Asia was defined by Humboldt, German historian and a researcher, that said this is a Central Asia. But then today we are seen as ex-Soviet Central Asia, so it's 5 republics, but then we cannot cut ourselves, for example, from the Uyghurs in China, or from the Tatars in the south of Russia, or from the Afghans, northern part, because it's like one body that got split. And it's curious when you go like a bit on not just linguistic and religious definition, which is always proposed as the first points, not to define a territory, then it's really unclear, we are related to sedentary culture, but we are related to nomadic culture also. Mm-hmm. We are Muslims since 8th century, but we have kept very deep animalistic beliefs and also Zoroastrian. We are in the East and we are not in the East. So it's like sometimes I think, which is very nice, maybe like we are here and there and nowhere, maybe,
It's really complex, no?
Yes. Thing, yeah, it's quite complex because we have like in the north Russia, in the south Afghanistan, east is China, and the west is the Caspian Sea, the Caucasus. So it makes the region very complex, and even it makes it very interesting, and so the question of the extinction and the disappearance, of course, I cannot say that it is less than in the rest of the world. I guess all these ecological questions and extinctions of biodiversity, it is happening everywhere in parallel, and so I speak it out from the place where I come from, which probably was not so well articulated before in films. But what I find fascinating, for example, with the haunted, with the tiger, it's a Turan tiger, which was a specific type of tiger that lived in Central Asia and Caucasus up to the Balkhash Lake, which is today in the north of Kazakhstan, so close to Siberia. Speaking by people, you know, you see how this animal just changed the place of life of. It inhibits dreams of people, it inhibits this parallel space, and I think it becomes much bigger and way more strong in the faith of people, you know. They see this animal as an animal that keeps the spiritual space, is a guide that will always guide us, even if he's not present anymore. And of course, it's interesting, it's probably, you know, this pain of losing, because the animal was sacred, it was never hunted, it started being hunted with the expansion of Russia. And then,
by the Russians? Hunted? By
the Russians, yeah, well, like the locals would never touch a tiger. And then, of course, mismanagement of the rivers that brought to the dry of the Aral Sea, and you know, the tigers, they live in Central Asia, they live close to the reeds, in the reeds, close to the water. So they extinct in this way. But like when I spoke to the locals and I have collected their dreams and stories, very often the tiger appears in the dreams of healers before the initiation, you know, like they don't accept it, they think, you know, like they can be taken to the hospital, they can be treated, you know, but there is this presence of the animal that keeps on insisting that a healer should start healing or a musician start playing. It's actually very beautiful that for us the word healer and a musician, it's the same word, bakhsh.
Okay, there's no difference.
There is no difference. Because they are both are there to not only to heal and play, but in fact to give you probably your identity, your definition, and also as we speak about this ancestral knowledge, it's that's how the transmission happens. And I think also the music is the form of art that is the last one to go through the colonial processes. It's fluid.
The music.
Music. Well, for me, yeah.
But why? I mean,
there is something, you know, when it was in Central Asia, of course, it was noted, it was brought onto the stage, it was totally cut from its natural environment. But then the forms of music that still serve the community, which is like music played at funerals, played on weddings, played for healing sessions, the music that is still continues living in its meaning, purpose. That's where this history of last 100 years didn't touch. You know, you really you jump over. And I think that this definition of bakhsh and a presence of tiger, like also some musicians told me, you know, like the tiger didn't let me. I had to start playing, and then when they start playing, through the dreams, you know, through the nightmares, it lets them go. So they see it as a guide. And it's curious because, again, as I told you, maybe it's related to this pain of losing a sacred animal, and then it becomes reinforced in the conscious of people, you know, it becomes even a more important figure.
So you think it became stronger after the extinction?
I think so.
Okay.
But I looked in tales, I looked in, actually there is one epic story, well, you know how the epic stories, they carry a memory like beyond time, no? It's, the time totally breaks in epic stories. There is one epic story we have, actually, like in the Western world, the epic stories are known as heroic stories, male heroic. Our epic stories are mostly female heroic stories. There are women that guide, and it's probably a memory of a matriarchal society. So there is one epic story where I found the presence of tigers. So I guess as it was sacred, it was important. But I don't know if it, I would say it got stronger by seeing the way people speak, because I can judge from my experience, from what I have lived with them. Yeah.
Do you consider cinema as a healing art?
Absolutely, yes.
Absolutely. And you commit, your creative process having that in mind?
No.
No.
No. I don't. I rather look for probably certain type of state and a mood, and that's where I edit. But just to speak about the healing, I was reading about Uber Bals and his quotes. There is actually one quote. He said that cinema should be provided by the health insurance in Netherlands.
Okay.
And it should be a part of a treatment, because it makes people, he doesn't say that, but from that phrase you understand everything, it heals, it makes
really
you dream.
Makes sense, yes. No, there's this disease, that you are like every day exposed to, and there maybe cinema can come and heal you a little bit.
Yeah, I believe in that, yes.
So tell us a bit more about dreams, about dreams in your work, because I think there are important films and pieces, installations that deals with dreams, like Two Horizons, Sucra, maybe. And how do you use dreams to achieve films and pieces of art?
Well, I think that in Zuhra it was more more direct, because the myth itself speaks about a girl that falls asleep and transforms into a star. And it was my first film that I did kind of out of the cinema space, and the work that I did more not thinking like where the film gonna end up, will it go to, will it have audience, but just follow your pure intuition and what you really want to do with it, without counting that it will ever be even seen, So.
And that was in Biennale, no?
But it ended up in Venice, yes, in Central Asian Pavilion in 2013. So in Zuhra it was very direct, because the myth speaks about the girl that falls asleep. But then when I did, it's 30 minutes of the girl that sleeps. And when I was editing, I worked a lot with the sound, and it became kind of a sound travel for me, where it's a bit of kind of exercising the memories, and probably very much related again to my grandmother and to the history of Uzbekistan somehow. So it became very, very layered. And so it's like dreaming, where you travel into your subconscious. Well, I should say also that I, as maybe probably many people, I dream a lot. Okay. And it's, it's probably a space like cinema, no? Where you can escape somewhere. But it has a logic that is very free. It's a logic that you cannot rationalize, and I also think it's a very dangerous space. Okay. It's not a space like a very romantic, no, because the codes are not very clear for me, and I think that it's still a question mark for me, the sleeping. And I think that it's also a very active space. An act of sleeping can be very active, I think.
Yeah, and the Turan tiger has visited you, your dreams?
Myself, no, but my mother, yeah. So that text, it was a reaction to the dreams of people whose dreams I have collected when I was making the Stains of Oxus, yeah.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
The text is written more as a farewell to the Turan tiger, because when I spoke to people and I have realized kind of a pain, I thought the animal became not animal anymore, it becomes a bigger presence. And then I thought, well, maybe this act of goodbye or act of, but then it's not a goodbye, it's actually became a reconnecting, an act of reconnection, yeah.
Okay. I want to ask you about the number 40. That is very important, no? For not only for your work, I think, like, you know, for the imaginary in Uzbekistan. Please tell us a bit more about the number.
Well, the 40 is, I start researching it because of the film 40 Days of Silence, because of this ritual of vow of silence. But then when I start researching more on number 40, it just start appearing from everywhere, and then I have realized that it's like a glue of our culture, because it is there like in architectural solutions, in embroidery, in jewelry, in prayers, in tales and recitations, everywhere, like really everywhere.
Like in the weddings, no? Also
in the weddings, rituals, you know, it's everywhere. And of course, this ritual probably was known in the rest of the world, you know, like there is the 40 days of a soul to get detached after the death. There is the 40, we have this belief, 40 days when a child is born, you know, there is 41st sacred days that the child is not shown to anyone. And, but then there is a quarantine that everybody had to go with the COVID, you know. So the 40,
there's the 40 also there.
That's the 40. But then, you know, like trying to understand more and more, also romanticizing around it and trying to look for it in the local cosmology, in local beliefs, I didn't find it. And my conclusion would be something related to our body. Probably there is a biological process in our body that is related to these 40 days. So, you know, I guess there is something hidden within our body related to this period, you know. There is a certain type of a cycle, I think. But baking, it was one after the other. It was, I made Gulaim, I did 40 Days of Silence, I did the live performance of 86 minutes with musicians.
BBC Shambe?
BBC Shambe, it was not direct, but again, yes, around the 40, but all this Chiltanin documenta, but also Chilahona, I made the video installation that was in Venice last year, but there I said, okay, stop, basta, you know, enough, because it's around 5-6 works, around 40, trying to understand.
Okay. And you understood?
No, I don't think so.
Do you, let's talk about a bit more of specific creative processes. Do you use script for your films? Or?
I don't. I have more like it depends on films. For example, with The Haunted, it was the text as a first, the monologue, no? So it was the monologue written, and then I just write the locations and images that can reveal, unfold the story. So it's just 2 words and nothing else. So that's more or less how I work. And I think that the monologue, it became, for me, the closest way to approach the work I'm going to do. As a first exercise, is to write a monologue. And then to look for the images as much as you can, references that the story can take you, because it's for me also important not only to speak on a historical or mythical point of view, but also layer it. There is a mythical idea, and then there is a historical layer, and then there is a present time, you know. So then if these 3 elements come together, then I feel more confident to film.
Okay. And you always work with the same team of people, or you work by yourself always? How is that?
It depends on circumstances, it depends on budget, it depends on the nature of the work we are doing, you know. So like The Haunted I just did alone, and very often when I need a camera work, I work with Carlos Casas, you know, so he makes camera. And for the music part, I love actually have collaborations each time with different composers.
Okay.
And this is probably one of the most rewarding parts for me. So for The Haunted, I worked with Camille Normand. She's a composer that plays on glass harmonica. For the feature film, I worked with Jakob Kierkegaard, who is a composer from Denmark. For the Chilahona, it was with Tomoko Suvashi, is a Japanese composer that works on the, she works with drops, water drops in the bowls, and we used only the feedback of the drops, so it's not the drops itself. So the whole score is built on the feedback of the drops. So
how is she called? Sorry.
Tomoko Suvashi.
Tomoko Suvashi.
Yes, and so now I'm doing a new work, and I hope a new collaboration will happen. So collaborating with the composers, it has always been a great adventure. Yeah.
Okay. Saodat, tell us a bit about the collective Davra that you achieved, in Uzbekistan.
Well, Davra, I think it actually started with this Kırkız, the 40 girls, the performance I did with the musicians, where I worked with the traditional musicians, but like really young, So for me, it was important that they don't go to the conservatory, because I think that that's where it gets kind of broken. And I worked with them, so that was my first collective work.
All of them are women, right?
They were all women, and they were musicians. But from Karakalpakistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, no, there was not Tajikistan, there was Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, and Karakalpakistan, 4. Then with the support of Ministry of Culture of Uzbekistan, I created a lab attached to the Center for Contemporary Arts in Tashkent. In 2020, it was a year of COVID, so we started and then we had to go to quarantine. So that was a very mixed group, but all from Uzbekistan. So that was a second very beautiful experience working with young people. And then I always dreamt of having, I don't know if to call it collective or just a group of creators, dreamers from Central Asia that
healers.
That we could exchange and think, So when I was invited to Documenta, since the last Documenta was about collectivity, about sharing experience, sharing, like being together and doing things together, maybe not always perfect, maybe, but be in a process. So that was I said, okay, this is the point, this is the moment that I should go for this group. And so we are 20, and they are Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan, 4 ex-Soviet Central Asian republics. And they are young filmmakers, writers, curators, photographers, artists, very mixed. We work online, and I think that this is possible because we were trained during COVID time to communicate through Zoom. I think if this experience wouldn't happen, I would never imagine that we can work like this together if we are not in one place. So the process is very new and different. We are like spread around, but we are connected through like online. So they were together with me in Documenta. They presented their work, so the space I had in Documenta during the 40 days was given to them, so they just activated as they wished. Okay. There were readings, there
were no rules?
No, I didn't, it was just, I just was sure that they have everything what they need to make that sure, and so there were screening of their films, performances, music. Some of them wanted just to cook and to have people interact. So we had that, and it was really nice. So now they're actually putting together a website, so everything was documented, because a lot of people don't understand what we did in Documenta.
Okay. How's the address of the website?
I will tell you when it is. I think it's davra. Something, what? I don't remember what it was after the
Davra
dot.
Collective.
Davra, no, it's Davra point something. Okay. But they are like putting the content and everything together now. It's not yet open.
Okay.
Yes, so we are planning to open it like by the end of the summertime. And then we are programming like film programs. They did a very great programming in Pompidou about the Central Asian cinema films, art films. And I, museum online player. So it's more that for the moment. But we also have some plans to make a collective work and mostly research-based.
Okay. Archival footage, it's important in your work. Now that you mentioned pandemic, I recall that you told me that 2 of your films, you made them during the pandemic, that it's Her 5 Lives and Her Right, no?
Yeah.
And made with archival footage.
Yes.
Just tell us a bit these two works, please.
Well, because it was COVID time and probably all of us went through this question, what's going to happen afterwards, you know, like the only thing I know to do is to make films. And also when you find out like you cannot go out and film. So I did these 2 works out of the archives I had, so it was like doing a film without filming and to probably secure yourself mentally also that you can make films without filming as well, you know. So it happened that it's the situation that pushed. Actually, in the both works, you can recognize the same footage, the same shots from the Uzbek film, but the concepts are totally different. One is Her Right, dedicated to this political campaign that it happened in 1928 in Uzbekistan, which was related to unveiling women. That what they said, we're going to emancipate women, but they thought that just taking out the veil, they would emancipate, which was very aggressive movement for the women in Uzbekistan. So one film is that, and the second one, Her 5 Lives, I looked through the Uzbek cinema how the image of a woman, a protagonist, was changed, reflecting to the political landscape and how the women wanted to be seen in a society, because the cinema for us was always an ideological tool. So the Her 5 Lives is about these 5 moments, historical moments in Uzbekistan in the last century. So it was a very nice exercise for myself, you know, like when you do film without filming and when you work with the same footage but you do 2 films that have different, absolutely 2 different idea.
Okay. You also work with collage, no? How do you approach the language of collage in comparison to cinema?
Well, I think that the collages, they come from when you ask about the method of work, there is this visual research that you do, you know, it's very basic on Google, you just go from one to the other and it really helps you to build layers. And then there are always images you find that are, kind of expand that world, no, what you are looking for. And then putting them together, it was never an intention of making collage, you know. It's more like when you try to phrase your, what you have in mind. So you phrase it with the help of putting images together, juxtaposition of certain images, and that's how it happened, you know, the collages. And actually this year, for the first time, I print it on a photo paper and I do it manually, but before that it was just in some software, like InDesign, putting together images. Okay. And it was to phrase what I want to say. So it also was like doing them with not particular intention that they will become by themselves like seen as collages. Yeah.
Okay, but so for your work as a filmmaker, is the process is the same as for the collage? I mean, you first have an idea and then you search for the images.
Yes.
For both languages. I mean.
The collages are actually the collages that you have in Umbrales. They are from the 2 horizons. Mm-hmm. So it actually says more, it gives more layers, you know, to the work. Yes, it's called Fear, this series, because the 2 horizons speaks about this character who was called Korkut, and the Korkut is translated from our language as a fear. So it's all going, you know, in between these 2 worlds of mythical world, and also speaking about Baikonur space station, because Both are about for the search of immortality of a human, no? And so it's just phrasing the thoughts, I think.
Okay. And what about the letters?
Well, the letters, it's different because it's like when your intimate familial story of your family becomes collective. Because you see through my great-great-grandmother, who is the first here on the page, and then her son, and who was my great-grandfather, then my grandmother, then my mother, then myself. So it was looking through the writing, in fact, as we spoke before, you know, the change of the alphabet. So each character, what is exposed, no? It's the writing of that person. So this is
okay.
My great-great-grandmother, she was a teacher of poetry. So this is her writing, and I cannot read that writing anymore, even if I keep it. Then after her is actually my great-grandfather. It's a circular, yes, it's him here, yes. It's the circular writing, which is an amulet of protection he wrote. And it's still in Arabic writing. Then there is my grandmother, which is on the page before. It's all, there are 3 alphabets she used because she lived the moment of this constant change of alphabet from one to the other. So in her writing, this was fascinating because she would just mix 3 alphabets, you know, and she had her own alphabet of writing.
Arabic, Latin.
Yes, and Cyrillic.
And Cyrillic. Okay.
Yeah. So it was a mix. And then there is my mother, who knows only the Cyrillic alphabet, and me, who I wrote in Russian. So for me, even the language changed. Not just the alphabet, even the language changes. Like they all...
This is Saodat.
It's me, yes. Like they all use the language the same, they just change the alphabetization. But for me, it's already not only the alphabetization, but also the language changes because I went to a Russian school.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know if you want to add something else before going to questions from the audience. Bueno, antes quisiera agradecer a FICUNAM por esta transmisión, muchas gracias. Gracias a todos quienes nos acompañaron y bueno, un aplauso para Saodat Ismailova.